When people talk about the biggest flops in NBA drafts, Darko Miličić is usually a name that gets tossed around. It's true that the second pick of the 2003 draft didn't exactly turn out to be what people hoped for, but it can also be argued that the Pistons did right by drafting him and the Serbian actually had success as an NBA player. To put things into context, one must first realize that the early 2000s were marked with a "let's find ourselves our Dirk" mentality for the teams. The NBA had just realized that international players were undervalued, and when you could find yourself the next Dirk as a GM, your job was safe for at least a decade. That's why the Pistons had high hopes for Miličić. Yes, he was an unknown prospect in the States, but was a 7-footer with a remarkable skill set. According to his 2003 scouting report, the Serbian big man was a do-it-all kind of player. He could dribble the ball, score in the post, run the floor, finish inside the paint, and displayed high basketball IQ. When you read it like that, it does sound good, doesn't it? But as we all know by now, there was a catch. Miličić was 18 and had only played for a Serbian team called Hemofarm before, where he averaged just 5.4 points and 3.1 rebounds per game in limited playing time. So why did the Pistons like him? Here other little nuances step in. The Pistons were a playoff team in 2003, meaning they shouldn't really have had a pick in the talented draft. But they did, thanks to an Otis Thorpe trade back in '97 when Memphis gave them their draft pick, although number 1 protected. Before the lottery, the Grizzlies had the 6th best odds, meaning the Pistons were looking at players in that range. Thus, the insight of Miličić as Detroit's international scout Anthony Ronzone visited and watched him in Serbia. But when the lottery happened, Memphis's pick jumped to number 2. Suddenly, the Pistons had the 2nd overall pick. They knew that they couldn't select LeBron James, who the Cleveland Cavaliers already had their eyes on from the beginning, but everyone else, including Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade, were on the table. However, the idea of picking Miličić still intrigued the Pistons. Firstly, then GM Joe Dumars was looking for inside help for his team, and secondly, Miličić was European, thus maybe the next Dirk. The last necessary domino piece for the Pistons to pick Miličić fell in place in May when Pistons were having a workout in a gym in Manhattan ahead of their playoff match with the Nets. At the same time, at the same gym, Miličić was also getting some shots up, and when the Pistons realized that, they quickly ran over there to have a peek at the talented big man. Miličić impressed everyone in the 20 minutes, with Dumars and his staff comparing Serbian's post moves to Hakeem Olajuwon, thus acing his so-called workout and pretty much guaranteeing his place with the Pistons. "He's going to own the game. We're going to have to build a new arena," said Pistons scout Will Robinson after seeing Miličić work out, even comparing him to the late Will Chamberlain. "Wilt used to do a little of everything, and I haven't seen a big man with so much skill since Wilt." And he wasn't the only one. Chad Ford, an ESPN insider, wrote, "Darko really is one of a kind. He runs the floor, handles the ball, shoots an NBA 3 and plays with his back to the basket, so you can slot him at the 3, 4 or 5. A few other guys can do that too, but what sets Darko apart is his toughness in the post. You've got to love a guy who has the footwork to spin an opponent, but still prefers to lower a shoulder and bang. The fact is, Miličić plays in an attack mode at both ends of the floor. The more you push, the more he pushes back." In hindsight, those comparisons seem ludicrous, but in his first game as a Piston, although a preseason one, Darko receives the ball on the right block, and without wasting motion, pounds 2 hard dribbles, bumps his defender under the cap, twirls towards the baseline, transitions the ball into the left hand and finishes softly.
"That was an eye-opener, folks,"
said the local broadcaster about Serbian's first ever basket as a Piston. But reality hit fast and hard for Miličić. Once the regular season started, he was buried on the bench behind Ben Wallace, Mehmet Okur, Eldon Campbell and others. Miličić didn't score a single NBA point until December and had played just 83 total minutes by February when the Pistons made a trade for Rasheed Wallace, thus pushing Miličić even further down the bench. But there might lie the twisted upside of picking Miličić. With him failing to live up to expectations, the Pistons were forced to make a move and strengthen their inside, thus trading for Rasheed Wallace and laying the true foundation for the going to work mentality and grittiness that carried them to the championship in 2004. If the Pistons had picked Carmelo Anthony, as most people expected back then, they would have never been in a position to trade for Wallace. And without Sheed, the hardworking Pistons, as we vividly remember them, might have never gelled as a team. Not to mention the fact that the fit of Anthony with the rest of the roster wasn't really there. Coach Larry Brown already had a young Tyshawn Prince and prime Richard Hamilton on the wings, whilst Chauncey Billups was bringing up the ball. Yes, theoretically Prince could have been relegated to coming off the bench, but then he might not be there to block Reggie Miller in the final minutes of Game 2 in the Eastern Conference Final. The counter-argument to that is that Melo's talent might have gotten the Pistons to look for a different path, one that could have indeed lasted for a decade. But whether that would have gotten them a title is something we'll never know. The reality is that Melo finished his illustrious career without a ring, while picking Darko, in a weird way, brought Pistons their third Larry O'Brien trophy. So, in the end it comes down to an age-old question. Would you rather have a shining career but no rings, or a lousy one, yes, we are being polite here, but still with a ring? Darko had the latter, an experience he isn't proud of but has somewhat embraced. I was European, I thought I was Godsend, he explained in an interview with the Serbian newspaper Blik, implying to the finding the next Dirk mentality that was there in the NBA back then. My goal was not to please others but my ego. I tried to take everybody, I thought I was the smartest and most talented, yet I wasn't working and didn't even try to listen to what they had to say. So I got into fights, got drunk before practice, spit on people, while I actually spit on myself. You can't go into the NBA at 18 and think you're the smartest. They'll devour you. You have to work. That's what they expected of me. I went to a championship caliber team and didn't respect them. Miličić implied on the reasons why the Pistons gave up on him and traded their next Dirk within 2.5 seasons. The next stops in Orlando, Memphis, New York, Minnesota and Boston were better for Miličić, as he even averaged 8.8 points and 5.2 rebounds in his best season in the NBA. But he never really could live up to the expectations of a number 2 pick, especially in a draft as loaded as the 2003 one. In the last 20 years, no other draft class comes even close to it in championships, as 15 players have earned a total of 27 rings from the 2003 draft. But at least Milicic's name is on that list, while, as already pointed out, Melo's is not.
Who, me? Oh.
So while touted as one of the biggest busts in NBA history, Miličić at least has that going for him, especially considering that from the 321 players from Europe, only 35 have gone on to become the NBA champion.
Darko Miličić, in his brief 2-year career, maybe with his finest moment offensively.